In the lively city of Zabari, weddings were more than just ceremonies. They were festivals that brought entire families together. The streets would glow with music, laughter, and the colors of traditional attires. For Amina, being chosen to join her cousin's bridal party felt like one of the greatest joys of her young life. She was not rich, nor did she stand out with jewelry or fine clothes, but her gentle heart and soft smile made her loved by many. To her, this was not just about wearing a special dress or walking proudly at the wedding. It was about being part of a celebration that carried the meaning of unity, love, and family honor. Every time she thought of standing beside her cousin, her heart filled with warmth. She spent her evenings dreaming about how the day would unfold, the drums, the dances, the chants that would rise into the evening air. In her heart, she believed she was not just representing herself but also her late mother, who had always taught her that kindness was the best jewel a woman could wear. Amina walked with hope in her spirit, unaware that destiny was preparing her for a story greater than the wedding itself. But not everyone was happy to see Amina in the bridal party. While she moved about with her soft smile and gentle nature, some of the other bridesmaids kept throwing glances at her when they thought no one was watching. They would whisper to each other, their lips curling into smirks. They had spent days choosing expensive fabrics, stitching the perfect dresses, and adorning themselves with jewelry that glittered under the sun. Yet somehow it was Amina, in her simple gown and natural beauty, who drew the attention of guests. People would greet her warmly, speak kindly to her, and often admire her kindness more than their polished looks. This silent jealousy began to grow, like a shadow creeping over a bright day. Amina did not notice it at first. She thought everyone was as excited for the wedding as she was. She laughed when they laughed, she helped them with their outfits, and she carried herself with the same humility her mother had taught her. But in the hearts of some, a quiet bitterness was taking root. They did not like how her charm did not need makeup or expensive beads to shine. They did not like how elders praised her gentle spirit, or how children clung to her side as if she were their sister. Sometimes when Amina turned her back, she would hear faint giggles followed by sharp silence. She never questioned it. She only told herself that maybe she had imagined it. Yet the truth was clear. Her presence made them feel small, not because she tried to outshine them, but because her light came from within, a light no one could copy or dim. And in their envy, they were already planning to push her aside. Just a few days before the wedding, Amina's world suddenly turned upside down. She had been practicing her steps, making sure her cousin's day would be perfect, when one of the bridesmaids pulled her aside. With a cold face and sharp voice she said, "You are no longer needed in the bridal party." At first Amina thought she had misheard. She blinked and waited for an explanation, but the words that followed cut even deeper. "You draw too much attention. People look at you more than us, and this day is not about you." The words felt like a slap. Amina's heart pounded in her chest as the other girls nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with something between anger and satisfaction. She wanted to defend herself, to say she never tried to steal attention, that she only wanted to celebrate her cousin's happiness. But her voice caught in her throat. They had already decided her place. In their eyes she was not a helper or family member. She was a distraction that needed to be removed. With no chance to explain, Amina was left standing alone, humiliated and rejected. She walked back home that day with her steps heavy, each one echoing the pain in her heart. The dress she had carefully prepared now felt meaningless, and the joy she once carried had been replaced with a hollow ache. It wasn't just about losing her role in the wedding. It was about being treated as if she never mattered, as if her presence was an offense. That night she sat by the window staring at the moon, holding back tears that threatened to fall. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I don't belong." But deep inside, though she did not know it yet, destiny was quietly reshaping her story. Sometimes rejection is not the end. It is only the beginning of a greater chapter. The wedding day arrived with all its colors, music, and joy. The air in Zabari was filled with the sound of drums and ululations, women's laughter rising above the beats, and men clapping in rhythm as dancers twirled in vibrant clothes. Guests moved around with excitement, sharing food, blessings, and stories. It was the kind of celebration that could make the city glow for days. But in the middle of all that happiness sat Amina, quietly tucked away in a lonely corner. She wore her simple dress, the same one she had planned to wear as a bridesmaid, though now it felt plain compared to the others. Her cousins danced in sparkling gowns, their faces glowing with pride as they took pictures and posed for all to see. Amina's heart was heavy with the memory of how she had been pushed aside, told she wasn't worthy to stand among them. Each laugh, each cheer seemed to remind her of the place she had lost. Yet, even in her sadness, Amina carried herself with quiet grace. She did not cry in front of them, she did not beg to be included again. She folded her hands in her lap and kept her head high, even as her chest ached with rejection. To the world, she looked calm, but inside she felt invisible, like a shadow in a room filled with light. Children who loved her tried to come sit by her, but they were quickly called away by their mothers. Guests passed by her without a second glance, as if her absence from the bridal party had erased her importance. Still, Amina whispered silent prayers in her heart, asking God for strength. She reminded herself of her late mother's words. Your value does not come from where you stand, but from who you are. And though the pain was heavy, a flicker of dignity remained in her eyes, a quiet fire that no amount. Just when Amina thought the day would pass with her sitting alone, someone entered the hall who made every head turn. It was Idris, the groom's elder brother. His presence carried a weight that could not be ignored. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a royal blue agbada that shimmered under the lights, embroidered with golden patterns that spoke of tradition and power. His steps were firm yet unhurried, like a man who did not need to prove himself to anyone. Guests whispered his name as he walked by, their voices filled with awe. Idris was not just the groom's brother. He was one of the wealthiest men in Zubari. His businesses stretched across cities. His name carried respect in markets and boardrooms. Yet he was not a man who flaunted his riches. He spoke little, listened more, and greeted both elders and children with the same warm respect. To some, his humility was his greatest treasure, a rare jewel in a world where power often made hearts proud. As he entered the hall, people straightened their clothes, eager to be noticed by him. Women smiled wider, hoping to catch his attention, while men nodded respectfully, wanting to be acknowledged. Idris, however, did not rush to join the crowd. His sharp eyes scanned the hall, not with arrogance but with a quiet thoughtfulness. It was in that moment his gaze landed on Amina, sitting quietly in her lonely corner. While others overlooked her, Idris noticed what many failed to see, the grace in her silence, the strength in her stillness. She was not laughing loudly or trying to impress anyone, yet she carried herself with a dignity that reached his heart. For a man like Idris, who had seen beauty and wealth in every form, it was this quiet strength that stood out most of all. He felt something stir inside him, a pull he could not ignore. Idris had attended countless weddings before, but this one felt different the moment his eyes fell on Amina. While the hall buzzed with laughter, chatter, and music, she sat quietly in a far corner, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She did not try to draw attention. In fact, she seemed to wish for the opposite. Yet, without saying a word, she carried a presence that reached him more deeply than the noise of the entire crowd. He noticed the way she lifted her chin, even though her eyes carried a hint of sadness. He noticed how she smiled politely when children waved at her, though no one else paid her any mind. Most women in the hall were dressed in heavy gowns, shining with gold and glitter, but there was something about her simple attire that carried its own elegance. Idris, a man who had lived around luxury and excess all his life, found that her quiet dignity spoke louder than the sparkle of any jewel. He watched her for a moment longer, curious. Why was she sitting alone when everyone else was caught in the joy of celebration? Why did her smile look so gentle, yet so fragile at the same time? To others she seemed invisible, a forgotten figure on the edge of the hall. But to him she stood out more than anyone. In that single glance, Idris felt something shift in his heart. He had met many women, seen many faces, but none had carried such a silent strength. It was as though her spirit whispered, "I have been hurt, but I refuse to be broken." And for Idris, that quiet resilience was worth more than gold, more than wealth, more than beauty. Something told him he could not just look away. She was not meant to remain unseen. Idris did not waste time thinking twice. Something within him pushed his steps toward the lonely corner where Amina sat. The crowd parted slightly as he walked, their eyes following him with curiosity. Why would the groom's wealthy brother leave the company of dignitaries and elders to approach a girl who looked so unnoticed? But Idris paid no attention to their stares. He reached her side, bent slightly, and with a gentle tone asked, "Why are you sitting alone?" Amina's heart skipped. She had not expected anyone, let alone Idris, to notice her. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should reveal her pain. Her lips trembled and she lowered her eyes, whispering, "I was asked to step aside. They said I wasn't needed anymore." She tried to keep her voice steady, but the hurt inside slipped through her words. Idris did not interrupt. He simply listened, his face calm, his eyes steady. But those eyes did not hold pity, and that surprised Amina. Instead, they carried something deeper, admiration. He saw the way she spoke without bitterness, how she shared her hurt without anger. There was strength in her honesty, a rare beauty in her humility. "You carry yourself with grace even in pain," he said softly. "That is not weakness, Amina. That is strength." Her eyes widened at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. In a room full of laughter, it was in this quiet corner that two hearts met. For the first time that day, Amina felt seen, not for her looks, not for her position, but for who she truly was. And in that moment, though neither of them said it aloud, a seed was planted. A bond that was more than chance, something the crowd could never understand. As Idris pulled out a chair and sat beside Amina, the hall stirred with surprise. Guests who had been clapping and dancing suddenly slowed, their eyes drifting toward the quiet corner. At first, they thought it was a mistake. Perhaps he was only greeting her out of politeness. But as minutes passed, they saw him lean closer, listening with full attention, his face brightening with genuine laughter at something Amina had said. That was when the whispers began. "They cannot be serious," one bridesmaid muttered under her breath. "Why would the groom's brother waste his time with her?" Another chuckled with mockery. "Out of all the women here, he chooses the one who was kicked out of the bridal party?" Their words dripped with jealousy, but behind their laughter was fear. Fear that the very girl they tried to push aside was now being lifted higher than any of them. Some guests grew curious instead of mocking. They watched the two with raised brows, murmuring quietly, "She must have something special if Idris chooses her company over the crowd." The elders nodded slowly, seeing more than the younger ones understood. They saw the way Idris's eyes softened when he looked at Amina, how his respect for her shone without shame. Amina, though nervous at first, began to relax as Idris spoke to her with kindness. He asked about her dreams, her family, her life beyond this wedding. For the first time that day she laughed, not a forced smile but a soft laugh from her heart. And though the whispers in the hall grew louder, Idris did not flinch. He was a man used to being the center of attention, but now his focus was on her alone. To him, the voices around them did not matter. In that crowded hall, it felt as if only the two of them existed, sharing a conversation no one else could truly understand. After a while, the music shifted, and the drummers beat their talking drums louder, calling people to the dance floor. The bride and groom were already dancing, surrounded by friends and relatives clapping in rhythm. Laughter filled the air, but in the corner, Amina sat quietly, unsure if she belonged in that circle anymore. Then Idris rose to his feet. His tall figure drew instant attention as he walked around the table. For a moment, people thought he was joining the other elders at the front, but instead he stopped right before Amina. Extending his hand with a warm smile, he asked gently, "Will you dance with me?" Amina's eyes widened. Her first instinct was to refuse. "No, people will talk," she whispered, her heart racing. But Idris only shook his head, his hand steady. "Let them talk," he replied softly. "This moment is yours." With hesitation but also a flutter of courage, Amina placed her hand in his. Gasps spread across the hall as Idris led her to the center of the dance floor. The drummers, sensing something powerful, changed the rhythm to a softer, graceful beat. All eyes turned toward the unlikely pair. They began to move together, not flashy, not boastful, but with a quiet elegance that silenced the crowd. Amina's steps were shy at first, but Idris's steady presence gave her confidence. The same bridesmaids who once mocked her now stood frozen, their jealousy burning as they watched her glide in the arms of the very man they all admired. The whispers had turned to silence, then to awe. People who once ignored her now stared as if seeing her for the first time. Amina felt her heart lighten, the sting of rejection melting with every step she took. It was not just a dance, it was redemption, a moment that turned her pain into power. And for the first time that day, She no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, honored, and cherished in the middle of everyone who once cast her aside. As Amina and Idris continued their graceful dance, the air in the hall shifted. Some clapped in rhythm, cheering them on, but not everyone could hide their feelings. The bride's friends, the same ones who had pushed Amina out of the bridal party, stood together at the side of the hall. Their faces were stiff, their eyes sharp with envy. The sight of Idris holding Amina's hand, guiding her with such honor, was almost unbearable for them. They leaned closer to one another, their whispers cutting through the music. "How did she get his attention?" one hissed. Another clenched her jaw, her voice bitter. "Out of all the women here, he chose her? The one we told to sit aside." Their anger burned hotter with every step Amina took on the dance floor. They had tried to erase her, to make her invisible, but now she was the very center of attention, and not because of the dress or the jewels they wore, but because of the dignity she carried. Amina could feel their eyes on her, heavy with resentment. For a moment, old insecurity threatened to return. But then she looked up at Idris, whose calm smile reassured her. She let out a soft breath and allowed herself to smile. Not with pride, not with revenge, but with gratitude. Gratitude for finally being seen, not as a distraction, not as a burden, but as someone worthy of respect. Her smile carried no bitterness, no trace of gloating. It was pure, gentle, and full of quiet strength. That was what cut the deepest. Because no matter how much the bridesmaids glared or whispered, they could not take away the peace that now shone from her heart. They had tried to break her spirit, but instead, they had unknowingly led her into the arms of the one man who could see her true worth. And as the music played on, their jealousy only made her light shine brighter. The music slowed, and the drummers let their hands rest for a moment. The hall grew quiet, waiting for the next beat. But instead of another song, Idris lifted his hand slightly, asking for silence. His voice carried through the hall, steady and commanding, yet filled with warmth. He looked around the crowd, then at Amina, before speaking words that no one expected. "This woman," he said firmly, his eyes never leaving hers, "is not invisible." His voice echoed against the walls, and people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "She has more worth than gold, more grace than any jewel could ever shine. And today, I am honored to stand by her side." Gasps broke through the silence. Some covered their mouths in shock, while others exchanged quick glances. The same guests who had whispered against Amina now struggled to understand what they were witnessing. The billionaire's brother, a man admired and respected by all, had not only chosen to dance with her, but now he was declaring her value in front of everyone. Amina's heart raced. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. No one had ever spoken such words about her in public. She had always been the quiet one, the overlooked one. But now, standing in the middle of the hall, she felt the weight of his declaration wrap around her like a shield, protecting her from every rejection she had ever faced. The bride's friends stiffened, their jealousy deepening as Idris's words erased their cruelty. Elders in the crowd nodded slowly, recognizing the strength in what he had said. Even children clapped their small hands, as if they too understood that something important had just happened. Amina lowered her eyes, fighting back tears, but her smile grew. For the first time, she was not only seen, she was celebrated. And it was Idris's voice, strong and unwavering, that turned her pain into honor before the entire city of Zubari. Among the many who watched in silence, Amina's aunt sat frozen in her chair. She was the one who had nodded when the bridesmaids said Amina should be removed. She had told herself it was for the best, that perhaps Amina's simple ways would make the bridal party look less grand. In her heart, she believed she was protecting the family's image. But now, as she saw Amina standing tall in the middle of the hall, her hand held with honor by Idris, shame washed over her like a heavy wave. Her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. Memories of Amina's kindness came rushing. How she always helped with chores without complaint. How she comforted the younger cousins when they cried. How she never spoke harshly even when she was treated unfairly. And yet, she had allowed the others to cast her aside, as if her goodness meant nothing. The aunt pressed her hand to her mouth, realizing the cruelty she had supported. For the first time she truly saw Amina's strength. It was not in beauty that demanded attention, nor in riches that sparkled under the lights, but in the quiet dignity that never left her, even when she was humiliated. That kind of strength could not be bought, could not be faked. It was something rare, something true. She whispered to herself, "Forgive me, child. I was blind." Her voice trembled, lost in the music, but her heart spoke loudly within her. She watched as Idris stood proudly by Amina's side, and she realized that the very girl they had tried to hide had now become the brightest light in the room. The aunt's tears rolled freely, not just from shame but from pride. She knew the truth now. Amina had not lost her place in the bridal party. She had been given a far greater place in destiny, and no rejection in the world could erase that. The atmosphere in the hall began to shift like the turning of a tide. Only moments ago, whispers had carried mockery and scorn, but now those same voices softened into awe. People who once sneered at Amina now leaned toward one another, murmuring words of admiration. "She carries herself like a queen," one elder said with a nod, his eyes following her every movement. Another guest whispered, "It's not the clothes, it's not the jewels, it's her spirit that shines." Every step she took beside Idris seemed to erase the sting of rejection that had weighed on her. What was once meant to shame her had become the very stage for her glory. The same corner where she had sat invisible was now where her story had begun, and the center of the hall had turned into her crown. Children clapped with excitement whenever she smiled. Women who had once ignored her now watched with curiosity, and even the men could not deny the quiet power she carried. The bridesmaids who had mocked her grew silent, their proud faces falling as they realized they had lost something greater than a title in the bridal party. They had tried to reduce her, but their cruelty had only lifted her higher. She had not fought back with anger, nor answered their jealousy with insults. Instead, her dignity had spoken louder than their pettiness, and now the entire hall could see the difference. Amina stood taller not because she wanted to prove anything, but because for the first time she believed in her own worth. She no longer felt invisible, no longer like the forgotten girl in the corner. The people who once looked through her were now forced to look up to her. And in that moment, her rejection became her crown, her silence became her strength, and her quiet grace became the legacy that no one could deny. When the last drumbeat faded and the laughter of the guests began to quiet, the wedding celebration slowly came to an end. The hall that had once been bursting with noise was now filled with softer voices, people saying their goodbyes and gathering their belongings. Amina stood to the side, still trying to take in everything that had happened. The rejection, the loneliness, the dance, Idris's bold words. It all felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. Idris noticed the faraway look in her eyes and walked toward her, his steps calm but sure. He stopped beside her and spoke in a gentle tone, his voice steady but filled with something deeper than comfort. "Amina," he said softly, "you deserve more than rejection. You deserve a life where love lifts you higher." She blinked, surprised, her lips parting slightly but no words coming out. She had heard people comfort her before, but this was different. His words did not feel like pity. They felt like truth, like a promise. Idris's eyes held hers, and in them she saw sincerity, a man who meant every word he said. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. For so long she had believed she was easy to cast aside, someone who could be ignored without thought. But now here was a man telling her she was worthy of honor, of respect, of love that would lift her rather than push her down. In that moment, Amina's heart shifted. She no longer carried the weight of humiliation, but the light of hope. Idris was not just speaking as the groom's brother, or as a wealthy man admired by all. He was speaking as someone who saw her value clearly, someone ready to stand beside her. And his words hung in the air like a seed of destiny, promising not just comfort for the pain she had endured, but the beginning of a new chapter filled with love, dignity, and possibility. From that day on, Amina's life changed in ways she had never imagined. People across Zabari spoke of her story, telling it with awe and admiration. It wasn't about Idris's wealth or the power he carried in the city. It was about how love had found her at the moment she felt most broken. The girl who had once sat alone in a corner, humiliated and rejected, was now seen, celebrated, and cherished by someone who truly understood her worth. Her journey became a lesson whispered in homes and marketplaces, that rejection is not the end, but sometimes the beginning of something greater. The same people who had doubted her now watched in wonder as Amina walked with confidence, her smile carrying the warmth of someone who had survived pain and found joy. Her quiet strength had become a beacon for others, a reminder that dignity, patience, and grace could turn the darkest moments into triumph. Amina and Idris's bond grew deeper with every passing day, not because of luxury or status, but because it was built on respect, understanding, and genuine love. Friends, family, and even strangers admired how she carried herself, unbroken, radiant, and full of hope. Her rejection had been transformed into a stage for her destiny to shine, and the story of that wedding night lived on long after the music faded. It was remembered not for the humiliation she endured, but for the moment life rewarded her with its sweetest gift. In the heart of Zubari, people would tell this story for years, a story of courage, grace, and the kind of love that sees the true value of a person, even when the world refuses to.